This program is brought to you by 3C TV. Like what you learned? Visit our website or follow us on Facebook and Twitter to keep up on the latest 3C TV programs.
Thank you. It's so great to have all of you here today. And it gives me great pleasure to introduce our keynote speaker for the day. One of the things that makes our system so extraordinary is the fact that so many of us have shared many of the experiences that our students have, and we understand the challenges that they are facing and overcoming on a daily basis. This is very much true for our distinguished speaker. Dr. Jannett Jackson was appointed president of the Chabot-Las Positas Community College District in May of this year, after serving 3 years as president of College of Alameda, capping nearly 30 years in the community college system. She began as a classified IT staff at Fresno City College. She joined the tenured faculty for 8 years in the classroom, and during that time, she was active in the Academic Senate, including the presidency of the Fresno City College Senate and serving on the curriculum committee for the statewide Academic Senate. She then became an instructional dean and eventually vice president of instruction at College of Alameda before her appointment as interim president. Dr. Jackson was certainly born to be a leader, but there was no silver spoon involved in her journey to achieve her potential. She was born in Louisiana, the oldest of 8 children, and was moved to live with family in Kansas when her parents divorced when she was in elementary school. That transition may have been very difficult for some other children, but she describes her attitude about that transition as an adventure. And that spirit seems to have guided Dr. Jackson to where she is today. Like many of our students, Dr. Jackson faced financial challenges to pursue her higher education aspirations, and so she joined the United States Air Force, hoping for an adventure, followed by an education funded by the GI Bill. When the Air Force sent her to Merced, instead of on the adventure she had dreamed of, she switched branches to the Army and ultimately joined the National Guard, where she retired as full colonel in 2010, after 2 tours of duty in Iraq. She was the recipient of numerous awards, including the Bronze Star and the Combat Action Medal. Jannett earned her doctorate in educational administration from the prestigious Community College Leadership Program at the University of Texas at Austin, after completing her baccalaureate and master's degrees at CSU Fresno. She's an outstanding leader in our system, and we're very pleased to have her with us today. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Colonel Jannett Jackson.
Good afternoon. I don't know if I need this, but I know that they're recording. When you stand in front of soldiers and in front of troops, you learn how to use your diaphragm and you speak from the gut. And one of the things that I always hated was when women got in front of a battalion and they would talk like this and say, "Come on, everybody." So I learned to huh and to kind of just get it out there. So I have a slide presentation because I really wanted to share with you the faces of the military and to share my own personal story. But after listening to our students, sometimes things parallel. So you're going to hear some of those themes again. Why I went back to school, the individual in the Veterans Office who helped me through that period, who told me, don't turn that check back in because they overpaid you. Keep that because Uncle Sam will come back looking for it. And if you turn it back in, you'll always be trying to pay that back. little tips that you don't know because you don't know the system. So you know the military system, but you don't always know the educational system. So I want to try to provide a face for you, and I find that pictures do that better than me just standing up here asking you to create a mental image of something that maybe you've never experienced. So the first slide comes from my last deployment, and that's what I'm going to talk about. I'm not going to talk about my first deployment, which was the Persian Gulf War. And because I was in logistics, I wasn't there just for the 3 days of the war. I was there before the war started. I was there during those 3 days, and I was there after the war ended, because in logistics, you call, we haul. And so we had to bring all of that stuff, place it out there, then we had to bring it all back. So this is a picture of my unit. It was the 40th Corps Support Group. It started out as the DISCOM, divisional element working with the 40th Division out of Long Beach, California. I had 143 people that were assigned to me, and this is only a sampling of those individuals because we work 24/7. And I mean that literally, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, irrespective of holidays or any of that. Things have to be moved, they have to be hauled. And so we did that. So we took this picture when we were in Balad, Iraq, and I'll tell you where that is. So one of the things you always do in a military briefing, and how many of you are veterans out there? Can I just get a showing of hand? Quite a few. You've seen this stuff before. You always have to tell everyone this is an unclassified briefing. If it were classified, I could tell you, but I'd have to kill you afterwards. So it is an unclassified briefing, and it's focusing on the U.S. Army. That's the USA, even though it's not the United States of America, it's U.S. Army. And then the MNCFI stands for the Multinational Coalition Forces in Iraq. So that's what those acronyms stand for. And if you don't learn the acronyms in the military, then I'm going to ask a question at the end to see if anybody knows. And if you do, I will give you a challenge coin. Next slide. So this is the purpose, is really, like I said, to put a face on veterans and who our veterans are. And I know a lot of you work with veterans, but you haven't worked with me, so I want to show you another different side of that from a leadership point of view and from an 06 colonel who had about 2,900 troops that reported to me. Next slide. When I first was deployed, which was in 2000, the second deployment, and I'm going to refer back to that, was for Operation Iraqi Freedom 4. And we had been there 4 years, as you can imagine. That's where the 4 came from. And we started in 2013 when we first invaded Iraq. And so I was there in 2005 and 6. And one of the things that was complained about, both locally at the state level and also federal, was that the National Guard and the reserves were being mobilized, and they only train 2 weeks in the summer and 1 weekend per month. How can you expect those troops to go over there and perform like active duty soldiers and airmen and sailors who do it every day? So they implemented a 3.5-month training that we had to go through so that when we deployed, we were trained. And again, we work 7 days a week, and we work usually 8 to 10 to 12 to 14 hours, depending on what the mission was. That was the mission. It didn't mean the preparation for the mission, and that's why it took sometimes longer than that. So we had 60 warrior tasks that we had to complete, and if you did not complete those tasks to standard, again, a military, to standard, not your standard, to standard, everyone meets the standard. If you did not complete those 60 tasks, you did not get deployed. Your unit as a commander did not get deployed because there were tasks that were individual tasks and there were also tasks that were collective that your unit had to do as a whole body. So we did that for 3.5 months at Fort Bliss. Somebody told me they were at Fort Bliss. Fort Bliss is not blissful. It is mirrors Iraq in the terrain, in the weather, the heat. And so that was why they put us there, so that we could get acclimated to being in that type of environment. Next slide. I hope you can see this. In the military, you make fun in your own way. So one of my soldiers was my driver, and he had a birthday, and we were in a Humvee, and I'll show you what those vehicles look like, and it was his birthday. And I said, "So, what do you want to do, Solis?" He said, "Well, ma'am, I know we can't do anything for our birthday because we're in the middle of training, getting ready to go to war." He said, "But I'd like to put you in the turret," and then it had rained 2 or 3 days, and there were these great big mud puddles. And he said, "And I'd like to go through the mud puddle." And I thought, oh, okay, I can get up in the turret, because I never get to do that. As a commander, you're always protected. You're a high visibility target. You're not out there. They want to make sure they're there, if necessary, to defend to death so that you don't get captured for propaganda reasons. So I said, that'll be cool. I'll be up in the turret with the machine gun, and see what it's like up there. And he went through every mud puddle that was out there. And they were hooting and hollering, and I was bouncing around. And at the end, they said, "The bird has landed," because I had 06, so I was a full bird colonel. And so you can see my sergeant major is nice and clean, and I look like I've gone through every mud puddle. Next slide. This was my A team. My sergeant major, for those of you that don't know, sergeant major is a senior enlisted officer, if you want to call it that. And he was a command sergeant major. And then I had my deputy commander, who the three of us made that triad. We were the ones that really were the brains, although we had outstanding individuals that were assigned to us. But those bonds never die. Those bonds are still there today. I could pick up the phone and call those two people and know that they'll be there. Next slide. So here it is, September, and we land in Kuwait. That is the last safe zone before you go off into the Badlands. And they put every unit through this, whether you're deploying in or out. You go through this safe zone. And I see people nodding heads, so you can imagine being here in Newport Beach. 18 hours later, you're looking at something like this. It is a culture shock. It is a culture shock. Next slide. We were at an air base called Balad. It was in the Sunni Triangle. And if you hit the transition slide, I think you've heard of the Sunni Triangle as one of the deadliest areas in Iraq. We were at the Balad Air Base. At its height, Balad was the second busiest air base or airport in the world, second only to Chicago. And that was called LSA Anaconda, a Logistics Support Area Anaconda. Anaconda being a multi-headed snake, and that's because we were like the hub, and everything went out from there. We would fly things in, the United States would fly in, people, equipment, whatever, and then my unit was responsible for being the security escort and sometimes the tactical vehicles to take that from that hub out throughout Iraq in our AO, our area of operation. Next slide. We were task organized, and that means these are the people that were assigned to me. I had about 2,900 people at my height, and then we started downsizing, so that number went down. I was there during the time that they had the first voting, and people came out with their fingers. We thought we were going to have IEDs at the election polls. It really wasn't. It was pretty peaceful, believe it or not. But we were also had task organized to us KBR, or Kellogg, Brown and Root, or Halliburton troops. Not troops, these were civilians that drove the vehicles, and then we escorted them because they could not have weapons. So we had a kind of a conglomeration. I had Air Force, I had Navy. Navy was really focusing on our intelligence and on some of our security equipment, encryption, and then I had mostly Army. But 2,900 people, 20 different units, And we did all the logistical operations between Baghdad, which was about 40 clicks away, all the way up to Crete, and in that Sunni triangle. Next slide. I wish it was better because these are the pictures of soldiers getting ready to go out on a convoy. When you go out on a convoy, you don't know if you're coming back. And you think, how could I do that? How could these 20-year-olds, 19, 22, 23, I think the average age in my unit was 22. How can they do that and know that they may not come back? Know that there are people out there that don't like them, not because of who they are, but just because they're in the military and wear a uniform. People that are trying to kill them, and in some cases succeeded, as you heard from our panelist earlier. But that is the face of our veterans, and they do it willingly, they do it with courage, they don't complain about it, and if you ask them what they do, you'd be surprised because most of them would downplay it. Next slide. My unit did over 600 convoys. I think the key picture and the key point that I want to make is the number of miles that we put on. Over 108 times if you subtract the circumference of the Earth at the equator into those of you that are mathematicians. I think it comes out to 108 times around the Earth, putting people in harm's way, which was very difficult, as you can imagine. So when I talk to people at my own district, I say, make a decision. If the decision doesn't result in anybody getting killed, I can live with it. It could be a bad decision. It's not going to get anybody killed, is it? If it isn't, then make the decision. I want people to know that it is safe, because sometimes the best lessons that I've learned have been when I made a mistake, not when I did it right. So I'm trying to build that within my own district so that people understand when you're put in a situation like that for me, a year, not counting the buildup, which was another 8 months. So 18 months of that, of wearing the uniform, when I was just like you, sitting at my desk, talking to students, and the next thing I knew, I was mobilized and in a different country, in a war zone. Okay, next slide. Logistics covers a lot of things, and I wanted to show you all the different components of logistics, because when I first went in the Air Force and I came home after being at basic training and going to AIT, or my advanced training school, I came home and my mom said to me, "Honey, don't you get tired of just marching up and down all the time and cleaning the bathroom with the toothbrush?" And I said, "Mom, what gave you that idea?" She said, "Well, that's what they show on Gomer Pyle, USMC." I said, "Mom, I have a job. I actually have a job that I go to every day." And I'm amazed that some people still kind of think that we still do a lot of that. We do in basic training. That's all part of discipline and, you know, us against them. But we really do have jobs, and jobs that sometimes can even relate to something that's in the civilian world. So we did water distribution systems and worked with rope use and basically taking water out of the Tigris-Euphrates River, purifying that, and we also helped to establish a water purification plant while we were there in Iraq, because one of our goals and one of our missions was to teach the Iraqis to be self-sufficient, not to rely on us to come in and fight their battles and do their water and all of that. So that was something that was added onto my plate when I went there, which wasn't there maybe during OIF 1, 2, or 3. Next slide. We also had a container yard, and again, these are all military people driving these vehicles, maintaining it. We also had an ammunition bunker, class 5, so that troops out in the field would come to my unit to get refills of ammunition. Everything from mortar rounds to RPGs to small arms, we were responsible for. Next Next slide. We also had what we called a crisp yard, which was a container redistribution supply point. And the containers that you see on the trains, the military has gone to stuffing containers rather than having what they used to call break bulk or loosely packed things in boxes. They found that, first of all, you could do in-transit visibility. You could put an ID tag on it, you can scan it, and just like UPS, who took it from the military, by the way, you can follow that piece of equipment or that container from point A to point B, and if it gets lost and goes into what we call frustrated cargo, you can find out what it is because you can go in and open it up, and there's ID tags on the inside. So we had a crisp yard for all of those types of containers, swapping in and out. Next slide. And then we did maintenance operations. And the maintenance operations, when you have all of that equipment, you have to maintain it. You can't just pull over to, you know, let me pick somebody, ARCO or Union 76. They didn't exist. So we had to do that ourselves. That was organic within my company organization. And we also did recovery operations too. And that was probably the toughest because if a vehicle was hit by an IED, we had to go and recover that equipment. We couldn't leave it out there for the insurgents to find. And so we'd have to go and drag that back. And when you do that, sometimes it's booby-trapped or sometimes there was a fatality. So that was really difficult. So I'm giving you this so you can understand how soldiers can come back with post-traumatic stress, dealing with that on a day in and day out basis, and they may be the age of your son or daughter who's living at home, 18, 19 years old. Next slide. Convoy operations and security escort. This was the biggest thing that we did over there, was escort equipment, personnel, supplies, back and forth. And that's why we got so many miles. And I'm just going to go quickly through some of this because I'm not trying to puff myself up or what my unit did. I really want to put it in perspective and put a face on what it's like to do this. So next slide. So these are some of our escort companies. Like I said, I had over 17 different escort companies that came in and came out because we didn't all go together. One of the things that the military is doing right now is drop in place, meaning that I will take a unit, contingent, it knows what its mission is, and I can put it with whatever unit. I could put it with an infantry unit, I could put it with a transportation unit, I could put it with the Air Force, but drop in place. So I had 17 different units that came in and came out over a period of that year that I was there. Next slide. You're gonna have to hit the transitions. These are some of the pieces of equipment that we had. The one that we originally had was the M1114, which was the one up here on the top left. That was the one that I got dunked in that when I was here in the United States. The newest piece of equipment that we had was the ASV, which is in the middle, the M1117. When we first got that, soldiers didn't want it. We don't want that, ma'am. It's so high, you can't really see. Until the first one hit an IED, and everybody walked away. Because it was higher, it was hardened underneath, it came out that way. We prefabbed the others. Soldiers said, we have to protect ourselves because it takes so long from inception to get it through production, to get the approval, and to actually get it out there to the soldiers. So we had soldiers that would weld the plates that you see in the Air Force onto the sides of vehicles to protect themselves. Yankee ingenuity, but it worked. And then the government said, well, maybe we should pay somebody to do this since it works and it saves lives. So those are the vehicles that we worked with. Comes back to me. Next slide. This is the one I was talking about that the soldiers didn't like. You can see the gunner sits up at the very top. If you look at the casualties from IEDs, not accidents, just IEDs, and they were in security escort vehicles, they mostly came from the gunner because the gunner was the one that was most exposed. And I can't tell you how many people volunteered to be the gunner. They volunteered to be the gunner, knowing that that was the most vulnerable position. Speaks volumes to our military personnel. Next slide. Again, just another picture of, this is one that was prefabbed, that we did ourselves. And just, they even prefabbed, that's why it's black in the front, because we took it off of something else. Somebody took it in and they did some metal works and stuck it up there, because when in Iraq it got hot. And because it has all these heavy metal plates on it, the engine would overheat. So someone said, who probably used to work in their yard under a car, said, hey, why don't we do it like they did the old Mustangs and, you know, put a breathing cap on top of it? And so we did. Next slide. Another ingenuity. Whenever you hit an IED, usually your casualty, if it doesn't come from shrapnel, will come from the vehicle burning. So one of the guys said, hey, ma'am, I know one of the guys over in the Air Force, you know, and they have an extra, I forgot what the unit is called, but basically it's a foam unit, FSP, I think, or something. And we can mount it in the back of our truck, and that way we'll go out with that in the truck, and then we'll put these hoses on it, and then if there's a fire, then the fire truck can come up and put out the vehicles, and that'll save lives. They came up with that idea, because if you ask a soldier or anyone that goes into combat why they're there, they don't get into the political part of it. They say, I'm there to protect my buddy. I'm not here for whatever you want to put the microphone in my mouth for. I'm here to protect my buddy and my friends and my, you know, my troops, okay? Just another picture of that. Yankee ingenuity, and it worked. And it did save lives. Next slide. The other thing that we did, everybody does, is guard duty. That doesn't go away. Guard duty is always there, and it may look nice and serene, but trust me, it was not. We had over 25,000 people at the Balad Air Base, a little city, and that's not counting KBR. That's troops, boots on the ground. And so with that kind of consolidation, that makes for a great target. So the other name that they call Balad, does anybody know? Anybody out there? They called it Mortar Readerville. You may have Mortar Readerville, not Margaritaville. Because remember, we're in a Muslim country. There is no drinking. There is no drinking. Mortar Readerville. And trust me, I was telling my table a story about being hit by a mortar, which is not hit physically, but close enough for shrapnel to be ejected. And I was talking on the phone with my husband, and I dropped the phone because we're trained that if you hear the siren and it says, incoming, 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 doesn't matter what you're doing. You drop, you cover your internal organs, and you try to make yourself as small as you can. So I was talking to my husband. I heard that. I knew it was going to hit within 100 meters. I got under the bed and tucked, and he was yelling at me on the other end of the line. What's going on, honey, honey? What's going on? It was no big deal. You get used to that. That's part of that PTS. That doesn't seem unusual. That did not seem unusual to me. He was having a fit because he said, I felt so helpless that I couldn't do anything to protect you. Next slide. The other thing that we were doing when I was there, and we continued to do, even until we pulled out, was to train the Iraqi troops. And we actually embedded them within our unit, which you might say, well, what if they're the bad guys and they're feeding? We always were aware of that. But you have to take a chance. And believe it or not, with these two individuals, one was from the old guard, the older man with the red, and then there was the new Iraqi. And the new Iraqi wanted to be like the USA. We want to be like the In the United States military, you know, we don't just go with a sovereign person. We have a code. The old Iraqi was really trying to reestablish the old Iraqi, but with a new person in place. So we understood that, but we still had to train them, even aware of that. Next slide. And I looked pretty thin then, too, I was noticing. And that's because I was wearing all this equipment every day, every day, every day. You have to lead by example. And I tell the people at the district where I'm working on the civilian side, I will never ask you to do something I wouldn't be willing to do. And I think it doesn't matter whether you're in the military or whether you're a civilian, people recognize that, and they know when you're telling them the truth, and they know when you care about them, and they are as loyal to you as you are to them. Next slide. I put this in here because we were hit by rocks, and before I was deployed, I would hear about the Palestinians throwing rocks at the Israelis, and I'd say, you know, they're killing these people because they're throwing rocks. And then I saw what kind of rocks they were throwing at us. Those rocks are like, I couldn't get my hand around it. Next slide. You can see what damage it did going through the windshield of a vehicle when you're driving 40 miles an hour, not expecting it, and somebody they don't throw it at you, they just throw it up, and your vehicle is going, and you hit it. So luckily there were no casualties with this. We did have somebody that was hurt, but they weren't mortally wounded. Again, just pictures of that rock. It was that rock that went through, and I kept it. IEDs, improvised explosive devices. People think that this only happens in third world countries like Iraq, Iran, whatever. Pakistan. We had an IED here in the United States. The first IED in the United States was, anybody guess? Exactly. Timothy McVeigh, the Oklahoma City bombing. That was an IED, an improvised explosive device that anybody can put together. Go on the internet, you could do it. Don't do it big because then you might get attention, but anybody can do it. Imagine driving along and you see a Coke can out there, regular old Coke can, because over in Iraq, everybody threw trash everywhere. I mean, there was no sense of, oh, we have to, you know, put all of this together. No, people, you drink it, you toss it, just like it used to be in this country, just like it used to be here. Going 40 miles an hour is really hard to determine that that's an IED. Which is why people say, well, couldn't you guys avoid them? Go 40 miles an hour and see something on the side of the road and you determine in a split second whether that's an IED or not. No, you can't. It's the luck of the draw, or it wasn't your time. Other IEDs. These were IEDs that were actually found that were not detonated. This one was on the side of a culvert and had trash around it, you know. And then this one was actually on the culvert pointing out toward the convoy, and one of the soldiers saw the wires and they pulled over and called in the bomb squad and took care of it. So they're detonated by garage door openers, cell phones, any device that has a timer that you can then detonate it, usually line of sight. This is a convoy. I had one person ask me, what is a convoy? I said, oh, I thought everybody knew that. So this is a convoy. It's usually, the military definition is 6 or more vehicles that pass a certain point within an hour. That's the definition, but it usually is a long line. This was from the first Gulf War. This is a picture I had from the first Gulf War. And I was in that convoy, and I got up on a truck and took a picture. Next slide. This is an IED that was detonated. Someone that pulled over the vehicles that are on this side. One vehicle that already passed. This was the second vehicle, which is why we don't bunch up like you saw on the other slide. We try to have some distance. So if you take out one, you aren't going to take out the whole convoy. You also don't leave yourself in the kill zone, which means they take out one in the front, they take out one in the back, and then everybody can't get around, because how are you going to get around this? and then they come in and, kind of rain down small arms fire. So why do I do this? Because we've had soldiers that have paid the ultimate price. And I think it is my duty to get up and tell their story. So why don't you leave that up there? I want to share some points with you, and then I will sit down. Why do I tell you about this? Like I said, it's not to puff up how important I am or what I did, but it's really to talk about the soldiers that were there, those 2,900 plus soldiers that reported to me, and to tell you about their sacrifices, because some of their sacrifices are universal to all soldiers, no matter what war they've been in, and even if they didn't go to a war, there's still sacrifices that we do in the name of training, like missing birthdays, missing weddings, missing holidays. I missed all the holidays: Labor Day, Thanksgiving, Christmas, New Year's, Washington's birthday, Lincoln's birthday, Veterans Day, Hanukkah. You miss those. You don't realize how much you miss until you sometimes come back, and that weighs on you. And we do it freely. Nobody said, we're going to make you do this. We raised our right hand, and I can't tell you how many times I've sworn people in. I do solemnly swear, state your first name, or state your name, full name. We do that freely. And we do it because countless numbers of people have almost daily risked their lives to try to live in the United States, because they want what we sometimes take for granted. And our soldiers and our airmen and our Marines and our sailors don't ask why. They said, I solemnly swear to abide by the Constitution and to do the orders of those individuals that are appointed over me, and I do this freely, and that's why we do it. Our veterans have proven their worth under some of the direst of circumstances, and many of them have paid the ultimate price. Almost 4,500 were killed from March 19th until November 19th. March 19th, 2003, when we first went over, until November 19th, 2013. And we've had more than 32,000 that were wounded, either mentally, wounded physically, or both. So as a veteran who's worn the uniform for over 30 years, it is my privilege to support the efforts of community colleges to reach out to those airmen, those sailors, those Marines, and those Army brats. To all of those who have served honorably, we owe it to them to make them feel welcomed, to provide the support services they need to make the full transition from the military to being a civilian, if they so choose. Because frankly, they deserve it. They deserve it. And by attending this conference, I know this is the third conference, I know you recognize that, but we are just the tip of the iceberg. There are so many more out there who don't know that. They may be your colleagues that say, well, why are we giving veterans special treatment? Why are we giving special treatment to that group? Because they're worth it. And if you do your history, you'll agree with me. That's my answer. We're not special, but you know what? We've done some pretty damn special things. We've given you the right to stand and ask that question and not be taken off to a jail somewhere, never to be heard of again. So when you think about veterans and you think about the face of veterans and you think about what you do, please take encouragement. We absolutely deserve it, but we also appreciate it from the bottom of our heart. And many times we won't even ask for it. So I talked to some of my staff when I was a president, and we were recognizing veterans. And there was a group of students in the back of the room. They weren't part of the presentation, but we were in the cafeteria, and they were back there laughing and joking, and, you know, I won't say what we call it in the military, but grab butting. And I said, excuse me, can I have your attention? We're recognizing veterans here. And it's because of veterans that you have the right to so many things. So, as a matter of courtesy, while we recognize them, I would like for you to be quiet. And the next time you see a veteran and you say the politically right thing of, I want to thank you for your service, look them in the eye and say it like you mean it. Veterans, would you please stand? Those veterans in the audience. Thank you for your service. And I mean that because I've been there. Thank you.